The sun fell slow that evening, spreading gold over the dying grass like a farewell. The wind carried the smell of dust and sage, the kind that settles deep in a man's bones and stays there even when he leaves the valley behind. And there, in the hollow between two sleeping hills, stood a cabin, old, wooden, and tired, yet stubbornly alive. Its porch leaned a little forward, as if listening to the land. Its windows glowed faintly from the fire inside, where an old kettle whispered. And outside, hammer in hand, stood Eli Grant, sleeves rolled, jaw set, eyes squinting into the amber light. He had been fixing that same porch for days, not because it needed mending, but because he did. Each nail was an act of forgetting. Each board he replaced buried another piece of a life he no longer wanted to remember. The valley was quiet then, too quiet. Even the crickets seemed to pause, as if the earth itself was holding its breath. Eli leaned his hammer on the railing, wiped his brow, and stared at the horizon. It was there, far beyond the cottonwoods, that he saw them. Riders, dark specks against the fading sun. At first, he thought they were shadows cast by the dying day. But then the ground began to tremble, soft and rhythmic, like a heartbeat echoing through the soil. He knew that sound. Horses, many of them, and drums. Inside the cabin, Mara was humming a hymn, one she carried from another lifetime, when her husband still sat by the window whittling and the valley still felt safe. Her hair was white as the frost that touched the fence posts in winter, her hands rough but tender, like bark around a living tree. She looked up when Eli stepped through the door. "Riders," he said simply. Her hum stopped. For a long breath, neither of them spoke. They both knew what that meant. The valley had been quiet for months, too quiet. Now the silence had broken, and what followed would not be peace. Mara poured 2 cups of coffee. The mugs clinked softly against the table. She set one before him. "You think it's them?" Eli nodded. "Apache by the looks of it. A full war band, maybe more." Her eyes softened, not with fear, but with sadness. "I thought Chief Nantan swore off blood after the treaty." "So did I," Eli muttered. "But treaties don't hold forever. Not when the land keeps getting smaller." Outside, the light turned red, the kind of red that feels like a warning. The wind carried faint echoes of distant chanting. It came from the south ridge, near the stone cliffs that the settlers called the Sleeping Gods. Mara went to the window. "We've no quarrel with them. Maybe they'll pass." Eli stared past her shoulder. His jaw clenched. "They're not passing." The riders were drawing nearer, silhouettes now, horses shimmering like ghosts in the dusk. Night fell fast. The cabin glowed like a lonely star amid a sea of darkness. Eli sat on the porch, rifle across his knees, not ready to use it, but unable to let it go. He'd promised himself never again. Not after what happened 3 winters ago in Dry Creek, when a drunken settler's quarrel turned into a graveyard of both white and Apache. Eli had survived that night, barely, but his peace hadn't. He'd put down his gun, left his badge in the dirt, and ridden west until he found this forgotten valley. Now it found him again. The horses stopped at the edge of the field. 200, maybe more. Their torches flickered like a necklace of fire around the cabin. The drums grew slower, boom, 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 until the night pulsed with their rhythm. No one shouted. No one charged. They just watched. Eli could see faces faintly in the torchlight, painted with streaks of white and red clay, eyes sharp as obsidian. But one face held him still. A young woman astride a pale horse, her hair black as the canyon shadows, her posture proud, unmoving. Even from across the field, her gaze met his. She did not lower it. There was no hatred there, only knowing. The kind that makes a man forget where he stands. He breathed out slowly. "The chief's daughter," he whispered. Mara stepped beside him. "You've seen her before?" "No," he said, "but stories travel. They say her name is Tala, the moon spirit. They say she was born during the great storm that took her mother." Mara crossed herself. "Then may God guide her heart and ours." The night deepened. The Apache didn't move closer. They simply sat their horses in silence, surrounding the cabin like shadows made of flesh and breath. It was not an ambush. It was a warning, or maybe a test. Eli went back inside. Mara had already begun preparing bread and coffee. "Why are you?" he started. "If they mean to speak," she said quietly, "then they'll need warmth. If they mean to fight, then kindness won't make it worse." He almost smiled. "You always did believe in feeding your enemies." She looked up at him, eyes calm as still water. "Because sometimes they stop being enemies when they're fed." The next morning came pale and heavy with mist. The sun was a dull coin behind clouds. The field outside shimmered with dew, and the horses stood motionless, breath steaming in the cold. The drums had stopped, replaced by a stillness so deep it pressed on the ears. Mara handed Eli a small loaf wrapped in cloth. "If they'll talk, you talk calm. If they won't, you come back to me." He nodded. His throat was dry. He stepped out, hands open, rifle left inside. Every eye followed him. A tall figure dismounted from a black horse. The Apache chief himself, Nantan. His hair was streaked with gray, his face carved like the land around them. Harsh, proud, and old. He said something in his own tongue, low and firm. Eli caught a few words: trespass, land, promise broken. "I don't seek trouble," Eli replied slowly, using what little Apache he remembered. "This land belongs to no one. I'm only fixing a roof, not stealing a home." Mara watched from the window, hands trembling around her cup. Another voice rose behind Nantan, softer, clearer. Tala stepped forward, translating for her father. Her tone was calm, her gaze steady. Each word carried not just meaning, but music, the kind of rhythm that makes the listener forget fear for a moment. "You say this land belongs to no one," she told him. "But my people buried their fathers here. The river runs with their songs." Eli bowed his head slightly. "Then I stand on sacred ground. Forgive me if I've done wrong. I only wish to build peace." For a breath, silence hung between them. The chief's face softened, barely, the faintest sign that war was not yet decided. Then he turned his horse, speaking quickly to his warriors. They did not retreat, but neither did they attack. They began to form a circle, settling near the tree-line, watching the cabin with a patience older than the plains themselves. Tala lingered a moment longer. Eli looked up at her. "Do you believe peace can still live in this place?" he asked quietly. Her eyes flickered, catching the sunrise. "Only if someone remembers what it sounds like." Then she turned her horse and rode back into the mist. By afternoon, the sky had turned bronze. The Apache remained, 200 strong, silent and waiting. Mara lit lanterns even before sunset, as if light could hold back fate. Eli sat on the porch again, hammer untouched beside him. The cabin creaked softly, like it too was listening. The wind carried whispers, children laughing, drums fading, the sound of hooves like a heartbeat fading into distance and then returning again. He thought of Tala's words. Peace was not a word to her. It was a memory she refused to bury. He closed his eyes, felt the rough wood under his palms, and breathed out. For the first time in years, the fear inside him wasn't of dying. It was of losing the fragile chance that something good might still be saved. Above him, the first stars appeared, cold, patient witnesses to men's foolish wars. And somewhere beyond those stars, he hoped someone was still listening. The night settled heavy upon the valley, thick as ink and twice as secretive. The cabin stood at its center like a lone lantern in the dark, its glow soft, trembling, alive. Around it, 200 warriors waited in silence, the horses breathing steam into the cool air, the drums now quiet, their echoes swallowed by the hills. Eli had faced many kinds of silence before, the kind that came before a gunshot, the kind that followed death, the kind that lived inside a man who'd lost too much to remember what hope sounded like. But this silence was different. It wasn't anger. It was expectation, the waiting kind, the sacred kind, the kind that belongs to people who believe something still can be saved. Inside the cabin, the old clock ticked slow, steady as a heartbeat. Mara sat by the window, watching the faint flicker of torches through the mist. "They've been out there all day," she whispered. "They haven't eaten, haven't moved." Eli poured coffee into 2 tin cups, his hand steady, but his eyes distant. "They're waiting for the chief to decide whether to fight or talk," he said. "And maybe He looked toward the line of torches. Maybe she's waiting too. Mara studied him quietly. She? He didn't answer. He didn't have to. The name hung in the air anyway, unspoken but clear. Tala. As the evening deepened, a soft drumming began again, slower now, like a heartbeat echoing through the earth. Eli stepped outside. The air bit his skin sharp and cold. 100 eyes followed him from the shadows. He lifted his hands, palms open. I come to speak, he said into the stillness, using the Apache words as best he could. The tall figure of Chief Nantan emerged from the darkness, his movements dignified and deliberate. He rode forward a few paces, then stopped. He spoke in his tongue, low and rough as the grinding of stones. Eli understood enough. Why are you here? Why on sacred ground? Before Eli could answer, another voice rose, clear, melodic, carried like wind over water. Tala stepped forward, guiding her horse into the circle of firelight. Her long hair shimmered with copper light, and her gaze, steady, unwavering, fixed on him again. She translated her father's words, though not all of them. There was grace in her restraint, mercy in her omissions. She gave him a chance to explain, to speak without the full weight of accusation. Eli took a slow breath. I came here for work, for peace. I build, I mend. I take nothing that isn't mine. Tala's gaze softened slightly, though her father's face remained carved from stone. She spoke again in Apache, her tone calm, rhythmic. The words she gave to her father were gentler than Eli's rough confession deserved. Perhaps she sensed truth in him, or maybe she was simply tired of endless war. Chief Nantan regarded Eli for a long, heavy moment. Then he dismounted, his boots sinking into the damp earth. He took a handful of dirt, let it run through his fingers, and said something short and final. Tala turned to Eli. My father says the land remembers every footprint, she said softly, even those that come in peace. Eli nodded. Then let mine be light. The chief's eyes flickered to him again, something unreadable in them, and then he turned away, motioning for his warriors to hold their ground. The truce had begun, fragile as spider silk, beautiful as dawn. That night, the Apache lit their campfires around the field, a wide ring of flame and smoke that shimmered like a living wall. The cabin glowed at its center, small but stubborn, a heart still beating in a body surrounded by danger. Mara whispered prayers as she stirred the stew, her lips moving silently. Eli stepped outside again, drawn by something he couldn't name, maybe the rhythm of drums, maybe the memory of eyes that had looked at him without hatred. The night was clear now. Stars spilled like spilled salt across the black. The air smelled of cedar smoke and wet grass. He walked slowly toward the edge of the fire circle, and there she was. Tala sat alone near one of the smaller fires, her bow laid across her knees. Her horse grazed quietly behind her, tail flicking at flies. Her gaze was turned toward the cabin, though her mind seemed far away, somewhere between memory and dream. Eli hesitated, then stepped forward. The nearby warriors watched, hands resting on their weapons, but no one stopped him. He stopped a few paces from her, careful not to intrude. She did not move, but her voice reached him, calm as water. You walk among warriors without fear. He smiled faintly. Maybe I'm too tired for fear. Her lips curved slightly. Not quite a smile, more a flicker of understanding. Or maybe, she said, you've learned that fear doesn't build anything worth keeping. He took another step, then knelt, setting a small tin cup before her. Coffee, he said. Not strong enough to start a war. She glanced at it, hesitant, then met his eyes again. In her silence, a dozen generations seemed to breathe. Finally, she reached out and took it. He sat across from her, careful to keep the fire between them. The flames crackled softly, painting their faces in shifting amber and gold. They didn't speak for a while. They didn't need to. The world around them had gone quiet, holding space for something older than language. At last, Tala said, almost to herself, my mother used to make tea when there was thunder. She said it made the sky less angry. Eli watched the steam rise between them. Maybe coffee does the same for men. She looked at him, really looked, and for a brief moment, all the old stories about enemies and borders fell away. There were only two souls there, caught between the flames and the dark. Her eyes reflected the firelight, but something else lived in them too. Sorrow, strength, curiosity. He'd never seen a look like that, not even in mirrors. The wind rose gently, lifting ashes into the night. Somewhere far off, a coyote cried, a lonely sound that echoed like memory. Hours passed. The fire sank lower. Eli stood, brushing the dust from his knees. "You should rest," he said. "Tomorrow will come early." Tala nodded. "And bring answers, perhaps." He hesitated, then spoke softly. "Do you want peace, Tala?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she gazed at the horizon, where the dark met the faint hint of dawn. "Peace," she whispered. "Peace is a word that dies quickly here, but I still bury it deep like a seed. Maybe one day it will grow again." He nodded, understanding something sacred in her quiet faith. When he turned to leave, her voice followed him. "Cowboy," she said. He stopped. "Do not mistake quiet for weakness." He turned back slightly, met her eyes. "Then I won't, if you don't mistake silence for indifference." A faint smile ghosted across her lips. "Fair." He walked back toward the cabin, the firelight flickering behind him like a promise half-kept. Inside, Mara sat awake, sewing by lamplight. "You were gone a while," she said, her tone light but her eyes knowing. Eli shrugged. "Talked a little. Shared coffee." Mara threaded her needle through the cloth. "With her?" He didn't answer. She smiled softly. "You look different, Eli. Like a man who's remembered the sound of his own heart." He sat beside the fire, staring into the embers. Outside, the drums began again. Not were drums this time, but softer, slower, rhythmic as a heartbeat. It sounded almost like a lullaby. Mara looked toward the window. "There's singing." Eli nodded, his voice a whisper. "It's a good sound." He lay awake long after she slept. The stars shifted, the moon climbed higher. He could still see the faint glow of the Apache fires on the ridge, and somewhere among them, he imagined Tala's face, serene, brave, untouchable. The memory of her voice played softly in his head. Maybe peace will grow again. He smiled faintly into the dark. "Maybe," he murmured, "it already has." The dawn came heavy with gray. Clouds rolled in from the south, thick and swollen, dragging the promise of rain like a secret too long kept. The valley held its breath. Even the birds refused to sing. Eli stood on the porch, hat in hand, watching the horizon where the Apache fires had burned through the night. Most were cold now, little curls of smoke twisting like ghosts above the trees. But the silence felt uneasy, as if the land itself was waiting for something to break. Behind him, Mara packed a small satchel, bread, jerky, a flask of coffee. "You mean to go to them, don't you?" she said without turning. Eli's jaw tightened. "I can't sit here while they decide whether to burn this place down. They'll see a settler walking into their camp. Alone. That's not courage, Eli. That's an invitation for death." He smiled faintly. "Maybe, but sometimes a man's got to die standing for peace, not hiding from war." She didn't argue. She just placed the satchel in his hands and whispered, "Then go gentle." The ground was damp under his boots as he crossed the field. No drums now. No movement. Only the smell of smoke and the sound of the wind brushing through grass that bent like bowed heads. When he reached the edge of the camp, a boy, barely more than 16, raised a spear in warning. Eli lifted his hands, palms open. "I come to speak with Chief Nantan," he said in slow, careful Apache. The boy hesitated, then nodded, motioning him forward. The camp was quiet, heavy with tension. Children gathered water near the stream. Warriors sharpened arrows, but did not look at him. Every face seemed carved from the same stone, tired, watchful, waiting. At the heart of it all, under a great cottonwood tree, stood Tala. She turned as he approached, surprise flickering across her face before she masked it behind calm. "You shouldn't be here," she said softly. "My father's heart is clouded today." "I need to speak to him," Eli replied. Before that cloud turns to lightning. She looked past him toward the hills, where a thin trail of smoke was rising, darker than the rest. "Something has happened," she said, her voice almost trembling. "One of our scouts didn't return." Her words fell like stones into the silence. Eli's stomach tightened. "What do you mean?" She swallowed hard. "He was found near the creek. Shot. White bullet." Eli closed his eyes. A single mistake. One frightened settler, one trembling finger on a trigger, and the valley would drown in blood again. Chief Nantan appeared from his lodge, his face drawn, his expression like thunder. He spoke in his language, voice rising sharp and fast. Tala's hands shook slightly as she translated. "My father says the peace is broken. The white man's bullet has spoken louder than words." Eli stepped forward, desperate. "That shot wasn't mine. It wasn't Mara's. There are settlers nearby, frightened, foolish. Don't let one man's fear destroy this valley again." But the chief's eyes burned with grief, not logic. He turned, shouted orders. Warriors began to mount their horses. Bows, rifles, and spears gleamed under the storm-gray light. Tala tried to stop him, speaking quickly, pleadingly. He ignored her. She turned back to Eli, her voice breaking. "You should go. Please. Leave before they ride." He shook his head. "If I leave, they'll see it as guilt. I can't. Then you'll die." He smiled faintly. "Maybe, but not by their hand. Only by my own if I stop believing peace is worth trying for." She stared at him, a long, trembling stare, then reached out and touched his arm just once. "Follow me," she whispered. They slipped away from the camp, down toward the stream where the scout had fallen. The air was thick, the smell of rain mingling with smoke. At the water's edge, Eli knelt beside the tracks. He saw the bullet wound, small, clean, unmistakably from a settler's Winchester. The man had died quickly, his hands still gripping a broken necklace made of river stones. Tala knelt beside him. She didn't weep, but her silence carried centuries of sorrow. "This is why there can be no peace," she whispered. "One wound opens the ones beneath it. My father lost his brother to white men. Now this. The earth drinks blood faster than rain." Eli stared at the reflection of the sky and the water, dark, bruised, restless. "I lost my brother too," he said quietly. "Different war. Same foolish hate. You think the pain belongs to one side, but it doesn't. It just changes hands." She looked at him then, and for the first time, her anger fell away. There was only the ache of understanding. "You speak like someone who has buried too much." He nodded. "And you look like someone who refuses to bury her heart." They sat there, side by side, the storm gathering above them. The first drops began to fall, soft as tears. Back at the camp, the Apache were preparing to ride. War cries echoed faintly through the valley, carried by the wind. Eli stood, panic rising in his chest. "They'll come for the cabin." Tala's eyes hardened with resolve. "Then we stop them." She mounted her horse, reaching down a hand to him. He hesitated. "You trust me?" she asked. "With everything left of me," he said, and he took her hand. They rode hard through the rain, the sky splitting open above them. Lightning flared across the hills, thunder rolling like drums of the gods. Eli's coat clung to him, heavy with water and fear. When they reached the clearing near the cabin, the first line of Apache warriors was already there, faces painted, arrows drawn. He jumped down, waving his arms. "Stop! This isn't the way!" he shouted, his voice raw against the rain. But they couldn't hear him, or didn't want to. To them, he was just another settler trying to trick them into waiting. Then came the sound, sharp, brutal. A gunshot. The world froze. Eli turned in time to see the bullet slice through the rain, straight toward him. But before it reached him, Tala moved. She leapt from her horse, arms wide, and the bullet found her shoulder instead. The impact threw her back into the mud. "No!" Eli dropped beside her, his hands pressing against the wound, blood bright against the rain. The warriors stopped, stunned by what they saw. Their chief's daughter lying in the arms of a white man, his body bent over hers like a prayer. For a heartbeat, no one breathed. Then Chief Nantan rode forward, face pale with shock. He dismounted slowly, his steps unsteady. Eli met his eyes, the grief, the fear, the disbelief. "She saved me," Eli said, his voice breaking. She saved me to save the peace you wanted. Rain poured harder now, washing the blood from her arm, mixing it with the mud. Tala's lips moved faintly. Don't let them fight, she whispered. Not because of me. The chief knelt beside her, taking her hand. He looked at Eli, really looked, and for the first time, saw not an enemy but another father's son, another wounded soul. He raised his hand to his warriors, shouting a single command. They lowered their weapons. No one moved for a long time. The rain fell steady, endless, merciful. It blurred the torches, softened the painted faces, washed the hate from the air. Eli held Tala close as the storm raged around them. Her breathing was shallow, but her eyes remained open, calm, unafraid. When he spoke, his voice trembled. Why? She smiled faintly. Because someone had to stop the storm. And then she closed her eyes. Time blurred. The rain kept falling. The war that might have been never came. The Apache gathered their wounded and returned to the ridge, carrying Tala with reverent hands. Eli watched them go, mud on his knees, blood on his palms, and something new, something fragile, stirring in his chest. He didn't know if she would live. He didn't know if he would see her again. But as the thunder faded into silence, he knew one truth deeper than any wound. Peace is not found in treaties or words. It is born in the moments when one heart dares to protect another, even when the world tells them not to. The rain didn't stop that night. It fell for hours, a slow, steady hymn that soaked through the valley, washing soot from bark, blood from stone, and grief from the air. By dawn, the fires were gone. Only smoke drifted like ghosts above the hills, and the land seemed to breathe again, tired but alive. Eli stood by the cabin window, staring out across the drenched fields. The horses grazed quietly, steam rising from their backs. Mara sat behind him by the hearth, sewing a bandage that didn't need to be used anymore, her fingers trembling with every stitch. You saw her fall, she said finally. He nodded once. Then she's gone. He didn't answer right away. He just watched the light break over the hills, thin and uncertain, like the first breath after drowning. I don't know, he said softly, but I felt her heart, and I think people like her don't really go. They just become part of the land. Mara said nothing after that. The fire crackled between them, and in that silence was a kind of understanding neither could name. Days passed. The valley changed, slower, gentler. The Apache riders stopped appearing at the tree line. The settlers who had hidden away began returning, their faces wary but hopeful. Children chased each other through the wet grass again, their laughter fragile, like something learning to fly. Eli rebuilt the fence by the stream. Each post he drove into the ground felt less like defense and more like prayer. One morning, as the mist clung low, he saw a figure on the ridge, wrapped in a blanket, walking with the careful grace of someone half-healed. For a moment, his breath caught. He thought it was a dream, but she came closer, and it was Tala. Her right arm was bound, her movement slow, but her eyes, those steady, moonlit eyes, were alive. When she reached him, neither spoke. The world didn't need words then. She touched the fence, running her fingers along the rough wood. You fixed it, she said quietly. He smiled faintly. Didn't want the cattle wandering into heaven just yet. Her laugh, soft and real, broke the heaviness between them. They sat by the stream where it had all begun. The water moved gently, carrying small leaves and reflections of clouds. Eli handed her a piece of bread from his satchel. She accepted it without hesitation. For a while, they ate in silence. Then she said, My father has made peace with your people. He sent word to the fort. The land east of the ridge will stay ours. The west yours. But the valley, she looked up, her eyes meeting his. He says the valley belongs to no one. It belongs to those who protect it. Eli nodded. Then it's safe. She smiled. For now, they watched the water in quiet understanding. Two souls from different worlds, bound by something deeper than borders. That afternoon, Tala rose slowly, wrapping her blanket tighter. I'll go back before the sun sets, she said. My people need to see I still walk. He stood too, not wanting her to leave, but knowing he couldn't ask her to stay. Will you come again? He asked. She hesitated. When the rains return, he nodded. Then I'll wait for the next storm. As she turned to leave, he called after her. Tala. She paused. Thank you, he said simply. She smiled, that quiet, unguarded smile, and disappeared into the trees. Weeks turned into months. The seasons shifted gently, as if afraid to disturb the peace that had settled over the valley. Eli planted again, wheat, corn, beans, and each time he turned the soil, he felt something healing in him. Sometimes, when the wind blew from the east, he heard faint drums in the distance, not of war, but of celebration. And when the nights grew long, he sat by the porch and looked toward the ridge, half expecting to see a flicker of firelight there. Mara grew quieter too, but not in sadness. She had started teaching the settler children, reading, sewing, small songs she remembered from her mother. Once she told Eli, "You think peace is something you win, but maybe it's something you plant, and just hope it grows." He liked that thought, so he kept planting. It was the second spring after the rain when the messenger came. A young Apache boy, riding bareback, his face painted in soft red. He stopped at Eli's gate and handed him a bundle wrapped in deerskin. Eli unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a string of river stones, the same kind Tala Scout had carried, polished smooth by the stream. Tied to it was a single eagle feather. The boy said something in Apache, words Eli didn't fully understand, but one name, one word, he caught clearly, Tala. Then the boy turned and rode away, swift as wind. Eli stood there, holding the necklace. The stones were warm from the boy's hand, but when he pressed them to his chest, they felt cold, ancient, eternal. He didn't cry. He didn't need to. The river nearby whispered everything that couldn't be spoken. That night, the rain came again. Not fierce, gentle, steady, like the memory of a heartbeat. Eli walked out to the porch, lifted his face to the sky, and let it fall over him. He looked toward the ridge, and for a moment, maybe a trick of the light, maybe something more, he saw her there. Tala, standing beneath the great cottonwood, her blanket glowing faintly in the storm shimmer. She didn't move, didn't wave, just watched, calm, eternal, as if to say, the valley still remembers. And then she was gone. The next morning, Eli found the necklace still around his neck, the stones glistening from the rain. He took it to the stream and laid it gently in the water. Go home, he whispered. The current carried it away, twisting through sunlight, vanishing into the bend where reeds grew thick. He stayed there a long while after, knees in the mud, watching the ripples spread. And when he finally rose, something inside him had eased. Not healed, not forgotten, just quiet. Years later, they would say the valley never saw war again. The settlers learned the Apache tongue. The Apache traded grain and horses at the new mill. Children grew up knowing both stories, the one of blood and the one of rain. And when they asked about the man who built the fence by the stream, the elders would say, he was the one who believed storms could teach peace. As the sun sank low one evening, Eli sat on the porch, older now, slower. The fields shimmered gold, and in the distance he could hear laughter, the kind that belongs to people who no longer fear the next dawn. He closed his eyes and breathed deep. The wind smelled of wet earth and pine. He thought of her, of dark eyes beneath the cottonwood, of the rain between them, of a promise made in silence. And for the first time in a long time, he whispered her name, not in sorrow, not in longing, but in peace. Tala. The valley answered with a whisper of wind, soft and endless. And somewhere, maybe in the rhythm of the river, maybe in the hush between thunder and rain, a voice seemed to answer, I'm here.